The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Breaking Free of Psyops. And glad to be here today. I hope you're all comfortable with a little cup of tea. Hopefully it's not a tea that has to deal with a cold, which I've got. I woke up this morning, just so you all know, as a disclaimer, with a little tingle in the throat, in the chest, and it has grown. It has grown into something scary. So I'm going to try to use my voice in a very soft way, and hopefully it doesn't give out, and hopefully the sounds of my rasping and coughing, which I've been bursting into periodically over the past few hours, does not disrupt too much this meditative experience that I hope is this totally not stressful show with no stressful information that is disruptive to our calmness. Let me just get a little sip of my peppermint tea. All right. So, with that disclaimer aside, I'm sure all's going to go well. Today, I decided that for the psyop that I would like to address today is something which is near and dear to my heart. And as I was going through putting together a bunch of slides, as you know that I like in these slightly more formal presentations, to have some slides, some quotes, some stats, some images, some maps, just to really drive the point home. And I realized that this is a much bigger topic in so many ways that's multifaceted. There's many moving parts that I'm going to try to bring together in one cohesive idea. And I do hope that this can work in one session. Maybe I'll do a second session in the future to add to this content. It's on drugs. So for those who didn't notice the headline, we're going to be addressing who's behind North America, and you can say even Europe, but let's go with North America's drug problems. Is it China? That's what we've been told a lot. We're getting that in Canada. We're getting that in the United States, that China is doing a reverse opium war. We'll say more about that. But is that true? Or is there another player, another power structure that wants us to look at China as the cause of these problems? And maybe it's something else. As you can see, I'm being a little facetious. There will be surprises littered throughout this broadcast. But before we do anything, like usual, we're going to begin with a few words from some of today's sponsors and go from there. So the first one I've got here is Pet Club.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
All right, thank you, Pet Club. And let's follow that up with a word from Mike
It's
Lindsay.
finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, My Pillow mattresses and My Pillow mattress toppers, as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets. Regular $69.98, now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, regular $49.98, on sale for $17.98. Wait on it, mega sale, only $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.
I feel like they ended that commercial a few seconds too soon, but that's just me. I don't know if you guys feel the same thing. But that being said, hope you get your Mike Lindell pillow. Those look like good deals. Now, as I said, I promised a few slides. I will deliver a few slides. So here we go. Let's add them to the stage here. As promised, got a little little fun cartoon there featuring what looks like a Sackler family, an Arthur Sackler family piece of propaganda advertising some product, OxyContin specifically, as something totally safe and pain-free, or that will cure all forms of pain. That was great sales pitch. So let's see what. As I mentioned, the claims that we're hearing from Fox News, we're hearing that across the National Post media in Canada, across Sky News, you name it, that China has been engaged in what's called a reverse opium war, with the infusion of fentanyl to destroy our vitality, just the same way that the British Empire and their American cohorts amongst the blue blood aristocracy of the Boston Brahmins and the New York crime syndicate ruling families, the Morgans, the Vanderbilts, just as they oversaw the spiritual war of the opium wars that went on from like 1840, 1839, 1840 up until really 1950. So too now is China getting its revenge. The dragon was asleep, acting weak, and now it's getting its long-awaited revenge because they hate our freedoms. They hate our democracy. They hate our greatness, our exceptionalism, and must destroy it by getting revenge, by infusing drugs into the streets of America and destroying our blah, blah, blah. You get it. So this is Marco Rubio blasting China, sanctions, threatened sanctions, other things, unless they would do something, unless China, Xi Jinping would do something about their drug flows through especially Panama. That's a big one that's also been used to promote the idea of kicking China out of Panama, using the threat of U.S. military invasion to get the Panamanian government to force China to divest of their infrastructure, to get out of the Belt and Road Initiative, which Panama did earlier last year, and to give over China's the ports that China had formerly run in a major artery of traffic for the world, and give them over to certain other companies. We'll say something about what those companies are and what they've been up to and what they've been caught doing. But all that to say, that's the story. Is it true? Where are the holes in this story? Are there any holes? Let's find out. So first, just a quick run through of a few graphs from 1999 up until 2023. I didn't have a more recent graph, but you know it's pretty bad. Over 100,000 deaths over the 2021, 2022, 2023. Just a fentanyl overdoses, and that's a male-female breakdown. Both sexes have it bad, but obviously the males have gotten it a bit worse as far as the addiction is concerned. And going back to 1999, overall total doses of drug-related deaths, less than 20,000 in 1999. That's a significant increase. And again, this is another graph featuring fentanyl, pure with no stimulants, fentanyl with stimulants. Both of those have really skyrocketed. This is up to 2021. In 2024, 2025, it started leveling out, but it's still abysmal. It's not going down. It's just leveling out. And then opioids, heroin, which peaked earlier on in 2013, 14, 15, started diminishing in an inverse proportion as the fentanyl use and death by fentanyl had increased. And this, as you can see, was 4 waves of intensity destroying America over the past 20 years, 25 years. And it says here, fentanyl was involved in 69% of drug overdose deaths in 2023. That's huge, hugely, what an increase compared to 1999, where it was about 4% of drug deaths or drug overdose deaths. Now it's almost 70% in a relatively short period. So this is bad. And the figures for Canada are not that different. This is for the US, but Canada, again, is really very similar. So I just want to say a little word about the use of drugs as warfare. So the first time we really saw this in a condensed way, as I mentioned, was the century of humiliation as it's known by the Chinese. And this is something that still traumatizes. The Chinese have not healed from it. I'm not saying that they want revenge for it necessarily. What I'm saying is they haven't healed from it. This is a deep psychological wound. It's hard to imagine for multiple generations being subjugated under that type of abuse. 2 opium wars were launched when China tried to do something about their drug problems and do something about the influx of drugs and the growth of organized crime syndicates like the Green Gang, like the Freemasonic outfits that the British Empire oversaw through Hong Kong and Shanghai. Both of those 2 areas were got in full control by the British in their concessions once they had the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842. After obliterating China, that had a much more technologically inferior military. And China went from being in 1795 the top GDP economy in the world. They were the most prosperous nation. Second was India. Europe was behind that. And they were plummeted down to squalor, third world status, even lower. And Hong Kong and Shanghai became the hubs for basically British and French imperial controls. 1865, at the end of the Second Opium War, which by this point had tens of millions of addicts in China. And again, because of the nature of the substance, it was conducive to building up systems of organized corruption directed by foreign agencies. That's one of the aspects of a drug economy. Is it's very, very useful at building up warlords into businessmen and having them interface as local managers for foreign supranational power, as China discovered, and that ended up managing its deep state. And in 1865, the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank of Commerce was created, overseeing the drug trade. That was its explicit purpose. Drugs were, upon the victory of the British, they forced the total legalization of drugs, of the opium that the British had acquired, had been building up as a system of production in India, because, lest we forget, the British got control of India in the 18th century, which involved doing the same thing and also destroying all of the manufacturing of India so that none of the Indians could actually produce for themselves. And all that they were allowed to produce under British economic control was opium. That was where they had a conducive ecosystem for growing opium. And that was largely either used by the local Indians or shipped off, especially to the Chinese. The Chinese were then induced to pay for their opium imports with silver, not just tea, but a lot of silver. And so China's treasuries, their financial resources were extracted. And because then it could be said that China was so incompetent economically that the Shanghai Board of Trade, which oversaw, the Customs House, which oversaw all protective tariff revenues, everything, as well as just general trade revenues, was all organized and controlled by these things, these customs houses centered around Shanghai, but that penetrated all of the ports and the entire economy and decided where allotments of funds were going to go. That was all run by the British Empire. It was all run by British appointees up until they were finally kicked out in 1950. Mao's crackdown. I'm not just saying that Mao was awesome. I'm not saying that he was awesome. I'm saying that maybe what we've been told has been very one-dimensional and lacks nuance, because there is something that was done as a policy which was not a bad policy, and that was the drug crackdown in 1950. total. It was called the General Order on the Elimination of Opium and Narcotics, and it set the stage for the most severe systematic eradication effort that had ever been seen before. 800 high-level drug criminals, dealers were executed. Another 400,000 dealers on a lower level were given severe punishments in prison, and about 15 million addicts were forced into rehabilitation, and work programs were put into motion that began to give people trade skills to start to give them a new purpose and a new mandate. So in that sense, on top of the mandatory treatments, you had agricultural reforms at that time involving opium-producing regions that were forcibly repurposed for new crops, and rural communities were empowered against traffickers. So we're given authorization to shut down local traffickers and black market stuff. So that was just a word just to point out how this is, where this came from. Now, Operation Underworld, this is one book. I've been reading some excerpts of it. I've ordered it, not read the whole thing, by Matthew Black, How the Mafia and U.S. Government Teamed Up to Win World War II. One excerpt from a review pointed out that it remained a secret, this Operation Underworld. This was a name given by Churchill and his American OSS compatriots. It was secret until 1977, when an author, Rodney Campbell, uncovered the classified 1954 Harlan's investigation report while organizing Governor Thomas E. Dewey's archives. The 101-page report summarizes over 3,000 pages of testimony that detailed the Navy's involvement, naval intelligence involvement with the OSS in what was dubbed Operation Underworld. So this involved Lucky Luciano, Mayor Lansky, the Jewish mafia, the Sicilian mafia, in a big, big way, and it's something which, again, was completely classified up until the 1970s. People had not known how this worked, and essentially, you had an open. It was open enough. People on the ground, including Dewey himself, Thomas E. Dewey, was trying to prosecute this and stop this from happening. Was a major figure in the U.S. Congress. And what happened was, after World War II, the mafia was used to pretty much try to identify fifth columnists and stop sabotage. Some could say, though, I think an argument could be made and have been made that are pretty persuasive, that they were actually working with the Italian fascists covertly in order to create sabotage. But that's, neither here nor there. Mussolini had a problem with a lot of these organized crime networks, it seems. So I'm not really too sure specifically if they were if they were being used for more nefarious purposes at that time during World War II. But after World War II, this complex, this massive organization under OSS and the Office of Naval Intelligence Direction continued its work. And this evolved into what became Air America. And this is a very good article online of the history of the CIA's covert airline. A film with Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. was created on this topic in the 1980s, called Air America. Yeah. But to get from the CIA or OSS, mafia, British intelligence collusion to this was not such an obvious leap. So what happened was, Lucky Luciano, who had to go to jail in 1943, a deal was cut. There's this book here called Cocaine, Politics, Drugs, Armies, and the CIA in Central America, as well as FBI, CIA, The Mob, and Treachery by Rodney Stitch, and The Great Heroin Coup, by the way, which is another good book. My wife has introduced me to all of these, and what I've read so far is really important. Drugs, Intelligence, and International Fascism by Peter Dale Scott and Heinrich Kruger. Peter Dale Scott wrote the introduction. Lucky Luciano was promised by Alan Dulles and company that you would be allowed to be taken out of jail. He had something like a 15-year sentence commuted, and he was sent back to Sicily to regrow his organized Sicilian mafia operations under U.S. protection. And this quickly was integrated with the KMT, the Kuomintang Party of Taiwan, that had gotten kicked out of China mainland China and went to Taiwan after 1949 when they lost that civil war. Now, at that point, you had here an agency that had been built up with the Kuomintang that was training the KMT, which was basically all of the key warlords and that had been propped up and given an immense amount of power under the British Empire during the Opium Wars. These warlords all conglomerated around the figure of Chiang Kai-shek, who was basically a fascist. He modeled himself on Mussolini's fascism. He wanted his nephew was actually running the Chinese Fascist Party, which had a special relationship with Japan and Hitler. He himself wanted to have an alliance with other fascist regimes, but yeah, he wanted to be an equal partner. The Japanese preferred not that, so he went another direction. And so the civil air transport is what came out of something known as the Flying Tigers. And what you have there is a guy named Claire Chennault, along with Chiang Kai-shek and Chiang Kai-shek's wife. There you have some of their Flying Tigers airplanes that were used as part of the Western training of Chinese airmen. On the bottom, you have Claire Chennault, his lieutenant named John Birch, who died in the early 50s or late 40s. John Birch had a society, a foundation built up around him to fight communism, and that was part of the anti-communist propaganda bureau. And it was called the John Birch Society, for those who don't know, and that ran a lot of the controlled narratives of how to understand conspiracies for people who were open to that sort of thing during the 1950s, 60s, 70s, all the way up until you heard Alex Jones say that he's a devoted follower of the John Birch Society and always has been recently on his broadcast before it was shut down. So the Flying Tigers ends up working with the KMT, especially after they get kicked out of mainland China, and this becomes what is known as the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure for getting heroin and cocaine, but mostly heroin, out of what's known as the Golden Triangle. The Golden Triangle is a heroin production, an opium production center in Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, which it was always run not by the Chinese Communist Party. It was run by the KMT that had massive paramilitary units stationed all over and maintained their operations there throughout the 1950s and 60s. The Air America operation, there you see the civil air transport was the civilian name given to what was otherwise a CIA front. When the mainland fell to the communists, the civilian air transport followed its nationalist benefactors to Formosa, and that is Taiwan. Business dried up rather quickly following the nationalist exile, and this civil air transport was on the verge of bankruptcy. The loss of the Chinese mainland to the communists meant that the air transport had no destination to fly to and few aircraft to fly in with. On a parallel track, the CIA grew to realize it needed covert air power for deniable, cheap, and effective missions in Southeast Asia. And hence, you had the buildup of this weird nexus that involved, again, Sicilian mafia working with the KMT and the CIA through these civilian front organizations, which continued for decades and decades after the fact. Dai Li is an important figure. He was the spy master of the Kuomintang. He directed a 300,000 agent paramilitary army that maintained controls within Burma. That includes the entire Golden Triangle. The British Burma was a British hub of control where Orwell learned the ropes of psychological warfare, and that fed back into the management of other parts of the colonies internationally. Marseille was another hub, and Panama, which formed a triangle of drug flows. Dai Li, and by the way, Cynthia wrote a series on this, which we're going to make into videos if we can raise the funds, and I think that'll be useful. Dai Li helped establish China's first modern intelligence organization in 1928 under the KMT called the Clandestine Investigations Section. And the Green Gang, that is sort of the Chinese triad operation, grew out of the Green Gang. It was always run by the KMT. And as I mentioned, They worked together to set up a new organization in the 1960s called the World Anti-Communist League. And that's a little symbol of the World Anti-Communist League, as you see it right there on the screen. Now, what you have there is a picture of Chiang Kai-shek opening the first conference of the World Anti-Communist League. It was a South Korean, Taiwanese, US CIA collaborative effort. And it brought in other nations from Europe and beyond as well into this united effort. That's the World League for Freedom and Democracy, as it says there. And got a few little bullet points. That it was founded in 1966 in Taipei and renamed the World League for Freedom and Democracy in 1990. It's an international organization of anti-communist politicians, activists, and groups initiated by Chiang Kai-shek. It brought together diverse right-wing and anti-communist groups, including the anti-Bolshevik bloc of nations, the Latin American anti-communist organizations, and groups involved in conflicts in Africa and Asia. Now, controversies are that, it had faced criticism for including far-right elements. This is from Wikipedia, by the way, so they're using a very diplomatic language. Former Nazi collaborators and individuals involved in scandals like the Iran-Contra affair. It's Operation Gladio. All of the unreconstructed Nazis that were put to work for the CIA and British intelligence after World War II and began to organize NATO secret armies. For those who haven't looked at Cynthia's work or Colonel Towner Watkins' work on the topic, highly recommend it. Daniela Ganzer also did some pioneering work on this. His books are fantastic reads. But this is Operation Gladio. In 1990, like I said, it rebranded itself a new name, the World League for Freedom and Democracy, with now a new focus on promoting democracy. It worked very closely with the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA front organization set up in 1983 that we've already gone through in previous episodes, that basically carried out CIA regime change, color revolution operations under the guise of democracy movements, but that were never that, were always steered from abroad. One of the top financiers of the World Anti-Communist League, which could otherwise, I think it should just be called the World Fascist International, was Reverend Sum Young Moon. He was the founder of the Unification Church. He was a strange cult leader who emerged out of South Korea, or was it North Korea, during the Korean War when the U.S. military had gone in with their proto-Vietnam exercise. And he described his process as a former teacher, school teacher, who then became sort of, I guess he had a revelation, a vision, where he saw himself now as like the brother of Jesus to create a new destined to create a new dispensation for mankind and renew the human species. He described it in one of his autobiographical interviews as this time in South Korea under U.S. occupation as my brainwashing. So that's literally what he called it, lovingly, happily, saying this was my brainwashing period. So it says here he's the ideological leader of the anti-communist movements, heavily backing the World Anti-Communist League. Moon established the International Federation for Victory over Communism in 1968, connecting conservative political figures in Japan and South Korea to fight communism. He was also brought into the United States in the 1970s and 80s in a big way. So as his Mooney cult was growing, as his mass marriages, weird forced marriages, and massive pedophilia operations with his little dancing girls from Korea that he would bring in to perform strange things in private for American politicians, as well as just pouring tons of cash into American churches, especially black churches in the 1980s. That were told to make certain adjustments if they wanted to keep getting their money. And if congressmen wanted to get their Rolex gold watches, they had to keep on promoting policies that were favorable or deemed favorable by Reverend Moon, Sum Young Moon, and his family. So again, weird connections here. But in the, especially 1970s, around that period that Sum Young Moon is being brought into the United States as the World Anti-Communist movement's going heavy, this thing is also behind a massive regime change operation in Afghanistan in 1978, 79. You have the CIA overseeing the overthrow of a leader in Afghanistan who's trying to maintain friendly relations with both the communists as well as the capitalists. That's not permitted. So he got to be killed. And then Zbigniew Brzezinski, with the Trilateral Commission, he ends up working very hard under Carter and first under Ford to ensure that the Mujahideen, these radical Islamicist terrorist groups, would grow massively through U.S. sponsorship in the fight against communism, of course, right? Because everything goes to fight such an evil, including doing more evil. And at that point, increasingly, Afghanistan became a world center once again, as it had been in the 19th century, for opium production. And opium grew and grew and grew throughout the 80s into the 90s as a major revenue for first the Taliban, until the Taliban said, no more of this. This is terrible. And they passed a law in 1999 or 2000, cracking down completely on the entire organized criminal syndicate, all of the old Afghan families that had been enmeshed in the system since the 19th and even 18th centuries in managing this, were executed and forced rehabilitation. And as you can see right there from the year-to-year opium production in Afghanistan chart, it almost was completely annihilated before something called 9/11 and shock and awe was launched in December of 2001. So at that point, with U.S. occupation now, the Taliban out of power, what you saw was an immediate restoration of opium production, which grew and only grew and grew. And this is only until 2018. It did continue to grow until 2023. By 2018, it represented over 90% of the world heroin production was coming out of Afghan opium. The laboratories, so you had the growing facilities, the laboratories that were transforming the opium into usable heroin, both within Afghanistan and abroad, were under the protection of U.S. and Canadian and especially British military operatives. I've spoken to many Canadian soldiers who thought they were going into the war in order to actually defend freedom and found themselves broken people coming out of the war because their entire assignment was defending the opium fields and the supply chains that went in from the laboratories to the production facilities and the export facilities out. In 2008, the U.S. government or military admitted that they were buying up the vast majority of it, as they said, for morphine for hospital use, although nobody needs that much morphine. So that was a very lame cover story. Now, today, one can see that since 2023, since the Taliban have gotten back into power again, you've got a collapse once more, 95% shutdown. So the Taliban, with their extreme poverty, not a functional economy because we destroyed their economy, and they're not really, the most capable when it comes to, economic coordination anyway. But yet, despite that, this low technology society was able to shut down the thing that the entire multi-billion-dollar force, trillion-dollar force of the U.S. military for 20 years was not able to do anything about. And yet, when there's an intention, 95% shutdown maintained to this day. So, I'm going to say a little something. Keep in mind, the drug use and overdoses from the 90s until the present is dramatically different. I'm going to say a word here about the Sackler family, because what was happening here this is not caused by China, the communists. It's not caused by any nation per se, these problems. This is caused by something above nations that penetrates into nations. That's one of the key things. Heroin, as you are breaking young men in these unnecessary imperial wars in Afghanistan and the Middle East more broadly, just like in the case of Vietnam and Korea earlier, what was happening is you're breaking them, but then you're also providing massive free drugs. You're giving them money, highly affordable drugs, creating a lot of addiction. So these young men are coming back with trauma, shell shock, addiction, back into the United States, and they're being discarded by a system that has no place for them. So you're creating a lot of dependency. Now, in the 1990s, the problem had already been organized around something called Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. Purdue was busted recently, but the family, and I misspelt it, it's OxyContin. This is the family that runs Purdue Pharma, and a much bigger multinational behemoth above even Purdue that Purdue is a part of, that had extended something known as OxyContin, a painkiller that was highly addictive in the 1990s through a mass publicity campaign into doctors' offices who began prescribing this highly addictive substance because they were receiving a lot of financial benefits and also misinformation. They were doctoring false studies in order to make it seem as though this is a lot more safe and a lot less addictive than they knew it always was. So this is going to play into the heroin addiction problem, but I have to say something about what is Purdue Pharma. In 1952, it was bought by Arthur Sackler and Raymond Sackler, two psychiatrists who worked together at the Creedmoor Psychiatric Center in Queens, New York. This was 1952. They were doing this. They would have been working around the same Ewan Cameron MK Ultra operation that was officially given that name in 1953 on how to use psychiatry in order to break down the minds, depattern minds, and then reprogram minds like one would a computer or an animal. And they had obviously noted that drugs, trauma were both very useful at facilitating that breakdown, that creation of essentially Manchurian candidates, right? That thing that Reverend Sun Myung Moon seems to have gone through as an MK Ultra brainwashing, a depatterning and repatterning operation. That was something that was always the objective. Now, in the case of the movie with John Frankenheimer, Manchurian Candidate, which is a decent movie, the story is there's a lot of truth, but it's also inverted in a certain way. I highly encourage people to watch that 1962 film with Frank Sinatra if they want to get a sense of kind of what this is. Now, the Creedmoor Psychiatric Center was an innovation hub for lobotomies, and the brothers especially battled interracial blood mixing. So they were basically carryovers of the eugenics movement. They were pioneers also in medical advertising and modern art pioneers who gave the first batches of post-structuralist contemporary art to the Guggenheim and Met museums. In 1995, Purdue, using a lot of their contacts in the government, bit of a revolving door like Monsanto, got the FDA to approve OxyContin. In 1997, there were 670,000 OxyContin users in the United States, but by 2002, that had skyrocketed to 6.7 million users. Now, the war on terror is now really getting into high gear. Men are coming back broken. The total revenue from 96 to 2001 was only $2.8 billion, despite having that many millions of users. By 2017, their revenue went all the way up to $37 billion a year just for fentanyl revenue alone. That's basically the active substance in OxyContin. So that's worth keeping in mind. Now, another thing to also hold in mind is that for the United States, they represent 12% of the drug users are from the United States internationally, and that's about 4% of the world population of drug users, and yet that's 80% of the opioid consumption is still American. So 80% of the consumption for only 4% of the world population of drug users and 12% of all drug users is interesting. That's an interesting fact, very disproportionate. So the addiction, very high proportionally in the United States. As I mentioned, 110,000 adults died in 2022 alone. Now, Purdue had already faced many lawsuits over their years because there was many revelations that they had done illegal, abusive things to get their product, their drug, into prescriptions across America. They were forced in 2025, after trying to resist this for years, to settle a case where they paid they agreed to pay $7.4 billion, which goes into effect this year. Now, so we were told that what a great, movement testimonial for justice this is, but it's not that at all. Even that is a bit of a sleight of hand, because the family, which is worth still to this day about $10 billion. Despite this, they're still worth $10 billion. Massively wealthy family. They're forced to pay $6.5 billion over 15 years with an upfront payment of $1.5 billion, because millions of families were destroyed by this, right? To fund opioid addiction treatment and prevention that they themselves oversee. So they created a new company specifically to deal with, provide opium addiction treatment and prevention guidelines that they then run, and that they paid themselves the money, right, to then oversee this over 15 years of paying out. So they didn't really, justice really wasn't that loud in this thing. If anything, they got off scot-free. Like I said, they actually didn't lose any personal funding or revenue. And the actual international behemoth that Purdue is a part of is called Mundipharma. And Mundipharma is wild. This they still run. The family is the principal owner of Mundipharma. It consists of more than 170 companies, many of them divided into company clusters known internally as groupings of independent associated companies, or IACs. There is no holding company at the top of the Mundipharma network. Before filing for bankruptcy in 2019, the Sackler's U.S. business, Purdue Pharma, was part of this network. So Purdue has filed for bankruptcy in 2019, right? They were just part of this much bigger complex. 90% of their companies are still marketing OxyContin globally. All right. This is just a breakdown in 2016 of Multipharma. Their revenues of $330 million of OxyContin pills outside of the USA. Canada received 20% of the purchases, China about 20%, Japan 16%, the UK 11%, France 7%, Australia 7%, Germany 5%, and other 13%. Excuse me. 2022. No, it's 2019. Mundipharma allegedly using fake doctors, misleading claims to drive OxyContin sales in China. They have gotten over 6 million Chinese hooked onto OxyContin who have received fake prescriptions from networks of fake doctors that are on the payroll of the Sacklers in China, using the same techniques that they had used in America in the 1990s to bring this now into China that had been trying to stave off this disgusting war against the soul of a people. So what had happened here? When the U.S. got control of the heroin production that again went into 90% of the world, opium production that went into 90% of the world's heroin in Afghanistan, in their occupation of Afghanistan for over 20 years, that began in 2001. So all of these people who are now addicted to OxyContin and were paying a good deal of money for their OxyContin fixes, all of a sudden found that heroin was like 50 times more intense and as far as powerful, and also significantly cheaper. So people began to realize, hey, I can just get heroin instead of my OxyContin, and it's more intense. Well, okay. Conveniently, for some reason, there's a massive explosion of access to heroin on the streets of America. As soon as the American military goes in and takes control of the heroin production, all of a sudden, it's more cheap. The price of heroin collapses during this time because it's so bountiful. And anybody can get it almost anywhere very easily on the streets of America. Who's bringing it there? Is that the Chinese? Is that the Russians? Is that the Venezuelans? Is that the Iranians bringing the heroin from Afghanistan under U.S. occupation into American streets? Well, now all of a sudden the addiction is going to only skyrocket even more, especially as more broken young men are coming back from war, needing to deal with spiritual pains, have you, right? There's not a lot of economic opportunities. And so it's just snowballing. We saw the same thing in Vietnam, right? Young men were coming back addicted to heroin in Vietnam in droves, and methadone was being prescribed in the 1970s to get them off it. It still is for this, which in fact it's been demonstrated that even that makes the problems of addiction even worse. The success rate of methadone getting people truly sustainably off of drugs is very poor. So what does China do? Okay, so because China's the bad guy, right? So China 2019, at the request of Donald Trump, Xi Jinping calls for a massive crackdown on fentanyl, but especially precursors. And what did they do? In I think April or May of 2019, China enacts sweeping class-wide ban on all fentanyl-related substances and precursor chemicals, along with dramatically reduced flows of fentanyl into the United States. That's what Dan Cohen had written in a fantastic article on Uncaptured Media. 2018, as an example, 2018 U.S. Border Patrol seized 314 shipments of fentanyl coming in from overseas, from ports overseas. So presumably a lot of that was from China, presumably. By 2019, after the Chinese crackdown, the U.S. Border Patrol seizes only 12 shipments incoming over the entire year, with a total of 11 pounds, down 96%. So clearly China, that was the effect of actually doing something and stopping the outsource, the sale of precursors. Now, one of the things here that I was surprised to learn in just going at this research is fentanyl has a lot of medical and industrial uses I didn't know about. And that's been the point in reading a lot of the Chinese responses to their accusations. They're like, well, look, the fentanyl precursors, like the things that go into making fentanyl, are found in fragrances. The perfume industry uses these precursors. Plastics, the plastics industries use these precursors. Medications like tumor medications, anti-malarial drugs, huge demand for anti-malarial drugs in Africa and in India. Again, tumor medications galore, all use various precursors. And so the problem that the Chinese have been trying to explain is that it's very difficult, if not impossible, for a business in China that makes 40% of the world's pharmaceutical products, because globalization, that's the consequence of the decisions that we went with Kissinger back in the 70s, who said, okay, we are going to now impose a model of consumer haves and producer have-nots into this forever model where we will be the post-industrial society of developed people, and then you'll have the third and second world of undeveloped people who will remain poor, but they will be given just enough to survive, but not enough to purchase the goods that they produce that will then be shipped around the world to sell at dollar stores that at low quality. Part of that arrangement involves China becoming a producer of 40% of the general pharmaceutical products, and much more for a lot of the other industrial products. So you've got companies in China that make these things based on a momentum of supply and demand, and they get an order for some of the chemicals that one could say are precursors that could be used for fentanyl from a company that looks like a legit company based in the Cayman Islands, based in Colombia, based in Mexico. Now they have a website. These companies have a website. They look like they're legitimate. They sound legitimate. They got a legitimate bank account. They seem to have employees, a location. So they'll sell the product. It's called capitalism. Now, unbeknownst to the people who sell the product to the purchaser in let's say Mexico, turns out it's a front. Right? It's a front company, and those products are then turned into fentanyl or combined in labs, let's say in Latin America or in even Canada, right? In where we have many labs. A lot of those labs are actually run by Khalistanis, but that's a different story. And then they're infused in the rest of the civilian population. So I mean, how do they know, right? So it's a bit of a dirty game. So who is the real culprit behind a lot of this? I mentioned here the Khalistanis. So Canada busts drug racket financing anti-India activities. So these are a bunch of people who were arrested in something called Project Pelican. The proceeds from drug trafficking were being used to finance anti-India activities. So basically, the Khalistanis are a separatist movement in India. It's a special, very, very small in numbers, but very powerful organized crime network. They're labeled as terrorists because they've been carrying out terrorist activities for a long time. They're the ones who killed Indira Gandhi. They're also the ones who carried out the Air India bombing in 1985 that killed something like 260 people off the coast of Canada, overseen by Canada's intelligence agencies that burnt all of their transcriptions and records, overseeing their monitored phone calls of the players in that terrorist cell in the 1980s. So just to say, there's some weird, shady business there. And the Amritsar temple, which was one of their headquarters in India, was used, and books have been written about this, as a center of drug running, of weapons running, drug monies, you name it. So they're committed to carving out, it's a separatist movement, to carve out their own country that was promised to them by the British when the British did partition and didn't follow through on that promise. And they've been used basically as tools of empire to carry out this kind of thing, just like the Sicilian mafia has been used, just like the triads have been used as tools of empire, just like the Meyer Lansky syndicates have been used for the same thing. They don't come out of any government. They represent something that is oligarchical and has been used to destroy governments from wherever they happen to be geographically. So I'm just saying this here because they were busted. And that was just one massive bust. You also have the story of the largest drug super lab in Canada's history, busted in October 2024, with record amounts of fentanyl, chemicals, and guns seized. 54 kilograms of fentanyl, massive amounts of precursor chemicals. So they had a whole industry built in here, underground facilities, 390 kilograms of methamphetamines, smaller amounts of cocaine, MDMA. This is all during an RCMP drug bust. And then you also have here, just in the last small, 4-year period, these are just some of the most noteworthy proven cases of massive industrial level Canadian, these are all based in British Columbia, Khalistani drug production labs that were busted by RCMP operations from the one I just mentioned. You had the Thanos Global Network, which had major operations taken down by the US DEA and Canadian collaboration in July 2025. It was a Surrey-based, that's British Columbia, organized crime family, linked to Talwinder Singh Parmar. And it was a precursor pipeline network, allegedly used Canadian trucking firms. So major control of Canadian trucking is run by a lot of these groups to move fentanyl precursors from China into the US. So they're buying a lot of these from China, but they're also buying them from India. And that's something Dan Cohen's even been proving, is that India has actually now taken over the production of fentanyl and its precursors and have no real oversight in any way. And so a lot of the criminal elements of China have just moved over operations to avoid going to prison in China into India. And a lot of the already existing Indian elements of crime have gotten to work to compensate now to fill that vacuum. And then Project Pelican is featured there on the screen, but there's more. There's something like 18 different drug busts that I saw just in the last 4 or 5 years alone of these groups. And they work with the Sinaloa cartels, both in Mexico, but also here in Canada. And that's just one picture of one of the big shipments from Project Pelican of drugs of different sorts and guns. Okay, but how is this possible, right? Because these things require lots of transfusions of cash, money flows, well, here we have now more examples of major players. One of the biggest, there's 5 big banks in Canada. I think this is number 4. It's also got big penetrations throughout the United States, called Toronto Dominion Bank, TD Bank. They were caught and fined $3 billion US after pleading guilty to a massive money laundering case. This is October 2024. Now, the next one, Banquets 2012. This is the Queen's Personal Bank was caught spending years laundering drug money, drug profits, and it was such an embarrassment that this Bank of Royals had their offshore Cayman Islands and offshore Caribbean holdings all sold off to the Royal Bank of Canada, which then continued to do exactly what they had been doing, except now under Canadian jurisdiction, which is part of the British Empire. Now, HSBC is, as I pointed out, the world's first preeminent drug bank, set up in 1865 in order specifically to carry out the drug trade, drug traffic, especially with the intention of destroying Asia. Between 2000, it says here, HSBC moved vast sums of dirty money after paying record laundering fine. FinCEN files probe reveals, that's the financial, going on blank here, probe reveals Europe's biggest bank aided massive Ponzi scheme while on probation over ties to drug kingpins. So between 2013 and 2017, HSBC's U.S. compliance staff, who are charged with monitoring customer activity, filed reports lacking crucial customer information on 16 shell companies that had processed nearly $1.5 billion in more than 6,800 transactions through the bank's Hong Kong operations alone. More than $900 million of that total involved shell companies linked to alleged criminal networks. Now, this was between 2013 and 2017 when they already had an auditor installed, because they had been discovered to have been behind the So in 2012, Senator Carl Levin had proven, and there was the Levin hearings, that they had been laundering hundreds of billions of dollars of drug monies, and they had to pay something like $1.5 billion or $2 billion of a fine, and then have an auditor installed to oversee their global operations from London. It's a London bank. It's not even people say, oh, Hong Kong, Shanghai Bank of Commerce. See, it's the Chinese. No, it's not. It's a London bank with that name, because those are the two British control hubs that were maintained for about over a century to destroy China. So they had gotten caught, and then they did it again. And then they did it again. So what you're seeing right there is a more recent update, and this is December 2023. RBC has handed a $7.4 million penalty from Financial Intelligence Agency for, again, helping to launder drug money and having no oversight over who's actually using your bank and why. Now, the thing here, I discovered this when I went to Hong Kong in 2019 with Cynthia, and we were surprised to find out that the Hong Kong dollar, they don't use the yen, they use the dollar, but it's a Hong Kong dollar. And it's something which is a carryover from the days the British Empire only gave back Hong Kong in a limited way to mainland China in 1997. And it's still, HSBC is still featured on their money. As you see under the lion, the British lion is the HSBC symbol, because they control still 1/3 of the money supply of Hong Kong. The other 1/3 is the Bank of China, which is allowed to print 1/3 of the Hong Kong money supply. And another 1/3 is Standard and Charter, another bank that was caught laundering drug money and was fined, or at least they had high-level bankers with Standard and Charter that were caught helping mafia narco criminals to launder money, and they were fired and the bank was fined. Now, HSBC, again, is it's British, and their stock was pummeled here. It says in September 2020 by Financial Crimes Report, China Unreliable Entity List. So they were put on part of the probe that Xi Jinping began on his massive drug crackdown in China. He also put a massive government probe on these foreign banks and put them on the unreliable entity list. They were the untrustworthy foreign agents list that they have, and he also included Standard and Charter that caused their standing on the international sort of perception world to collapse completely. Their stocks collapsed. So China's been trying to do something about this, but there's a power that they still can't rein in, although they've been doing a pretty good job of imposing national regulation on these things. And as Xi Jinping has been doing, especially since 2019, and we see, he's getting attacked by human rights organizations for cracking down on human rights abuses on drug lords in China and different people who are finding ways of still producing fentanyl and other drugs. but especially in the banking sector. The former chairman of the Bank of China was given a death penalty for his role in overseeing these criminal operations, and this is in 2024. I think it was commuted to a life sentence, but still. So who else on top of the banks, right? I could have gone into more banks, but there's only so many hours in the day. You have your shipping, of course. A lot of the drug flows, illicit drug flows, happen through cargo shipping. So who's controlling that? Here's one case of a July 11th, 2019 CBS News article. A ship seized in $1.3 billion cocaine bust is owned by JP Morgan Chase. And not just that here. It says the ship MSC Guyane is owned by JP Morgan Asset Management. And JP Morgan leased the ship to Mediterranean Shipping Company. That's an important company to keep in mind. A Switzerland-based shipping company, which is solely responsible for the vessel's crews and operations. And so it's 20 tons of cocaine were seized on board. By the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So that's an anomaly. That's not a Chinese shipping company. Here, let's see what else there is. What else we got here? This is what's the date here? June 18th. This is what year is this? Oh, the same ship. All right, so this is a 16.5 ton confiscation by U.S. law enforcement of a ship. It seems to be, I think this is the MSC Guyana. Yeah, same ship's pretty busy. Also owned by the Mediterranean Shipping Company, who owns Guyana. Was caught. So there's 33,000 pounds of cocaine on a freighter ship docked at the port in Philadelphia. The supply of cocaine was worth over $1 billion. The drug bust in Philadelphia was one of the largest in U.S. history. This is 2 years or so before the previous article. And again, Mediterranean Shipping Company is added again. Let's see what else. All right, let's look at the next one. Nearly 1 ton of narcotics seized off of Yemen near Bab el-Mandeb Strait on October 11, 2025. So authorities in Yemen have intercepted a vessel carrying nearly 1 ton of narcotics off the coast near Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a crucial maritime choke point connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. The operations conducted by Yemeni security forces in coordination with regional patrol units led to the arrest of 4 individuals aboard the vessel. Officials reported that the seized contraband includes over 500 packages of crystal meth, 100 bags of hashish, and 10 bags of heroin. That ship, by the way, that was just caught was owned by Mediterranean Shipping Company. There's that name again, So what the hell is Mediterranean Shipping Company? So here's an article from Maritime Executive from March 3rd, 2026. It says Maritime Shipping Company, that's MSC, and BlackRock push to complete Hutchison deal for port ops. What's this? Let's go read a little bit more. The companies had agreed in 2025 on 2 deals, with BlackRock leading the purchase of the Panama Ports Company, which operated the terminals at each terminus of the Panama Canal, and MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company's Terminal Investment Limited, as a minority investor. It later emerged, however, that the Mediterranean Shipping would be the lead investor for the other 41 global port operations in 23 countries, ranging from Europe to Southeast Asia and the Middle East. The deal was expected to place a valuation of $23 billion in the portfolio, while CK Hutchison would have retained the port operations in China alone. So here's the thing. CK Hutchison owns, as a private company, owns an immense amount of international ports, including 2 ports, the Cristobal and Balboa ports on either end of the Panama Canal. Now, they don't control the Panama Canal. They're not even part of China per se, although there are Chinese laws that they are forced to abide by because they are still a Chinese company. However, they're run by a different guy named Li Ka-shing. We're going to say something about him. And his family is a very, very powerful, wealthy family. Now, there's 5 ports on the Panama Canal. The U.S. controls 2, Taiwan controls 1, China, through this company, CK Hutchison, had 2 of those 5 ports. And that was at the source of all the hullabaloo. Last year, the Panamanian government was forced to demand China divest, to get out of its country. And those 2 ports that China had built up and had been running were given over to BlackRock and Mediterranean Shipping Company. Now, Mediterranean Shipping Company had met with, their CEOs had met with Li Ka-shing, who runs CK Hutchison, to negotiate the sale of all of CK Hutchison's ports, including the port, except the ports around China in their jurisdiction. But all of the other ports, of which there's like 50, they were supposed to, or 41, no, 43. They were supposed to sell them all. And the agreement was a handshake was made, and all the ports were agreed to be sold to BlackRock and Mediterranean Shipping. That was intervened upon. The Chinese said, no, we have a law that says if you're going to do a private deal, it's going to put the national security of China under threat. You're not allowed. That's illegal. And they prevented that sale. However, to this very day, CK Hutchison, so CK Hutchison was forced to abide by a law. Li Ka-shing was unhappy, but he was forced to abide by the law. But to this day, BlackRock and MSC still control those ports. Now, they'll say, so they're running them. They're running the concession, and China's pissed. I'll say more about that. But they're, to this day, that's the thing. And their plan is, and they're still pushing to finish the job. So they said, oh, a promise is a promise. And they're trying to litigate right now to allow for the full takeover and sale of all of these international ports in the Middle East, in East Asia, in Europe, in the Americas by CK. So that's still a fight. That's probably something that's going to be discussed by Trump and Xi Jinping. So then we have here that CK Hutchison confirms Aponte's maritime shipping company is the main investor in port deals. So this is not speculation by that one website. This is confirmed by CK Hutchison that Aponte, the MSC, the maritime shipping, is the main investor. BlackRock is actually a secondary investor. They would just control Latin America, or sorry, the Panama area. But then there's more. My God. Because you also have another company called Maersk, a major shipping and port managing company. So Maersk is another company that is owned by the Maersk-Uggla family. It's a massive magnate family. They're worth about, I think, $26 billion as well. And China told Maersk and MSC to drop the Panama. So I was wrong. It was not BlackRock that currently owns the Panama Canal or is running the Panama Canal ports that China had formerly run. It's Maersk and Maritime Shipping that currently manage them. And it says here from Financial Times, April 14th, 2026, in a meeting with China's state planner last month, Danish shipping group Maersk and Switzerland-based Mediterranean Shipping were told to withdraw from the Balboa and Cristobal ports immediately, said 2 people familiar with the talks. They were also told not to, quote, engage in illegal activities that harm the interests of Chinese companies and to uphold commercial, ethical, and international rules. The warnings underscore Beijing's growing willingness to use its economic leverage over foreign companies in areas it sees as critical to China's supply chain security. So there's that. So, but maybe Maersk is more trustworthy. Maybe they're not so bad, right? Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I got a moon to sell y'all too. We'll say more about Maersk in a sec. But sir, first, Li Ka-shing, as I promised, Canadian-based multi-billionaire, tried to seek citizenship, subjecthood, I guess, as a British citizen. Margaret Thatcher, a good friend of his, he was the pallbearer at Margaret Thatcher's funeral. Promised him that she would give it to him. He didn't get it, but he did get, it says here, this is Wikipedia page. So right there beside, under his name, if you could see that, under his name, Li Ka-shing, it says GBM and KBE. That means Knight of the British Empire. He's actually made a knight by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of the British Empire. He's a British agent. He's a British chivalric knight, for crying out loud. He's not really Chinese in that sense. That's not where his loyalties are. So that's the guy that's been trying to sell off all of these ports to these things. Now, who owns maritime shipping? This is the figure of the major tycoon Gianluigi Aponte, a very secretive, quiet fellow who I think he's worth about $20 billion. His family has been a major port shipping family since 1674 on his official bio. Might even go even before that. And they've been doing deals with royals, with it's a very old family. So they've been at it for a long time. They've been managing tourism to the Isle of Capri, a major occult center of the world, for over a century. So it's an Italian-Swiss family. He married into a Swiss banking heiress, so he's one of the richest men in Switzerland, and a huge shipping magnate. Now Maersk, that's the Lower Maersk ship with some of the members of the Maersk family, Ugla family, along with Ursula von der Leyen. I don't know if she's related, but she's definitely friends with that family, inaugurating a ship. There's just for those who don't know or who didn't believe me when I said that China doesn't and never did control the Panama Canal. That's 5 ports, as I mentioned. So you got the Colón, the Manzanillo, the Cristobal. Cristobal is the one that the Chinese C.K. Hutchison had control over. Balboa there on the south also had it with C.K. Hutchison, and Rodman next to it. The 2, like I said, are run directly by the United States and have been for a long time. And the third one is a Taiwanese company. Additionally, the U.S. military transiting through doesn't have to pay transit fees. It's they just use it more. So when people say, "Oh, the U.S. is paying more money than other countries," it's because they use it 70% more than every other country uses it. That's why they pay more fees quantitatively, because they use it more. It's not like they're getting charged more for this thing. So Maersk, okay, I said, yeah, maybe they're more honest, maybe, yeah, no. So yeah, 2017 and 2023 got Maersk vessel caught in drugs haul. Rotterdam bust shows risk to box lines from narcotics trade, and another one from 2017 to the right there. Maersk ship's hull brings $14 million worth of cocaine into New Zealand. And it says here, the Netherlands Public Prosecution Service reported that a container with more than 8 tons of cocaine valued at 600 million euros was found by customs at the port of Rotterdam. The drugs were discovered hidden in pallets of bananas that had come from Ecuador via Panama. And more Maersk bad behavior. Cocaine from Maersk. This is 2023 November. Shipment in New Zealand. So, so in Tauranga, New Zealand, a massive haul was discovered of cocaine and other drugs. And another one, drugs seized on Maersk vessel in Panama this time. 39 packages of an illicit substance on board the Maersk Willemstad in Balboa on Sunday. This is September 8th, 2025. This was also heading to New Zealand. So Maersk is clearly, and honestly, I just did these as little Google searches over the course of about 30 minutes before the show, and there is so much. I just picked a few random samples, but you can Google shipping companies caught or busted moving drugs and narcotics, and it's a huge thing. And this again goes through, if you have to go back to the CIA mafia collusion throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s to understand this, because this is what was overseeing the entire Operation Phoenix. The Golden Triangle operations of the U.S. military in Vietnam were being overseen with collusion by both the KMT, but also with the Italian and Corsican mafias, the Sicilian and Corsican, and the Jewish mafias. So these were all one thing that brought the crack rock later on in the 80s into the streets and the ghettos of the United States, that was bringing and targeting especially the black population in order to destroy the type of positive image of mankind led by folks like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. That had to be consciously destroyed by these intelligence agencies. Now, another guy that I thought was interesting, just to keep in mind, Because you have George Soros, who's been behind the drug legalization program and the harm reduction programs that have been adopted by so many governments that have allowed for taxpayer money to go into fund people's drug addictions so that they would receive their drugs for free in order to then inject their heroin or whatever they're addicted to and go back to work. And that's the theory, at least. It doesn't work that way, where the idea was if you could just give these people as much drugs, safe space to use their drugs, they will be less inclined to hurt people, steal from their jobs or whatever. Doesn't really work. The drug violence, drug suicides, other things like that still go up despite it, and yet we do more of the Soros harm reduction programs. Methadone, for example, instead of actually dealing with the problem properly and cutting down the directors of this whole thing and giving people a real economic opportunity to build a life for themselves properly, which they currently don't have, which is why people get into a nihilistic state of feeling like there's hopelessness, only in despair, thinking of the future. And yes, that will make somebody inclined to use drugs if they become available. But here we got a guy named Paul Soros, billionaire shipping magnate, older brother to George Soros, also a billionaire. He died in 2013 at the age of 87. He was also working with the Nazis, just like his younger brother George, much more quiet, always stayed out of the limelight. And just as George Soros pushes drug legalization, you've got his brother who's in charge of port operations, supply chain management, warehousing, you name it, the technologies, the IPs, Soros Associates, which manages international shipping operations and technologies associated with shipping. They're active in 91 countries. It's a huge global behemoth. And they control mining operations and mining technologies. It's quite something. I've only just begun to look into this, but that's another, probably not a coincidence, and probably something people should look at, because this guy's not just a businessman. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission before he died. So he's directly part of the inner sanctum. Sorry, a little case of phlegm. And so finally, just to recap here, since the U.S. military expanded, and Cynthia Chung my wife did the most incredible series of deep essays on this. Some of that is in her Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set book. A lot of it's on her Substack, cynthiachung.substack.com. I'll put a link down. Her work is impeccable, but the operations built up in Vietnam were then replicated. And I mentioned the Flying Tigers, Claire Chenot. I mentioned a number of these figures like John Birch, Howard Hunt. They were put to work overthrowing the Guatemalan government of Arbenz in the 1950s, 54. They were the ones overseeing and in charge of the efforts to overthrow Castro, because Castro had gotten rid of Mayor Lansky's crime syndicates. He kicked out United Fruit cartels. He kicked out the drug dealers. I'm not saying I endorse his economic policies or his philosophy about political economy. I'm not saying that, but he did practically do those things, and he thus did have the animus of Allen Dulles, who really, really, really wanted him to die to bring Mayor Lansky and United Fruit back into play in controlling Cuba. So these guys were put to work doing that. They were put to work in creating what's known as Operation Condor, the drive into creating the entire cocaine and marijuana economies of Latin America was brought in by U.S. Special Forces, by right-wing governments installed by Bechtel, operations that were U.S. companies, but were actually fronts for the CIA and for Special Forces that then installed right-wing governments after killing nationalist governments that were trying to nationalize and fight back against the IMF and against this international global cartel. They were often ousted, as Salvador Allende discovered, and Pinochet was installed in his stead, who free-marketed everything, who massively privatized the economy on behalf of his handlers, Treasury Secretary of the United States, George Shultz, and Kissinger. So, you had this all across Latin America as these economies were turned more and more into drug hubs, and narco-terrorists were grown in their stead. This also involved the Cayman Islands and offshore banking, the British Cayman Islands being a hub for massive money laundering, where you have things like secrecy jurisdictions, where nobody's allowed to know who owns what. And this is a list of all of the governments that had been overthrown, from Cuba in 1952, Guatemala in 1954, El Salvador in 1980, Honduras 2009, Nicaragua in the 80s and again, Panama 1989, Haiti a couple of times, Peru a couple of times, Dominican Republic, Venezuela again, Bolivia in the 80s, Paraguay, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay. So, you know, and on the right there, what you have is a picture of U.S. Northcom, U.S. Southcom in green and below. That is a major control hub that was built up under the days of Operation Condor, when the Vietnam operations were brought into Latin America with the help of the World Anti-Communist League and the Mafia that built this thing up. So that was Operation Condor, where centralized databases of mass surveillance, of kidnapping programs, of mass murdering anybody who was a belligerent who didn't like the new fascist regimes being installed in Argentina would be round up and executed in secret, first usually tortured or disappeared into one or another U.S. adjacent military base all across Latin America. And if you look at it, to this very day, we're all told to be freaked out about China's military conquest, you know, of the world and their belligerence. Well, they don't have any bases except one outside of China, and that's in Ethiopia by the invitation of the Ethiopian government. The U.S. military currently has about 70 military installations here. This is just a graph. You see at least 3 in Mexico. You got a large number. Oh, Jesus, that's a lot. There's a list of all of their locations. On the left, it says here, the United States maintains a significant military presence in Latin America. This is an AI overview. And the Caribbean, focusing on drug interdiction, intelligence, and regional security under the Southcom. Key hubs include Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, Soto Cano Air Base in Honduras, and multiple sites in Puerto Rico, totaling over 70 locations. And that's just the public locations. I would say that there's still likelihood that the Operation Condor black operations are still in play. There's probably even more secret jurisdictions too, but you can't really know. And nobody in the special forces is going to talk about that. There's something I want to show very quickly, and it's going to go over a little bit. So for people who want to watch Gordon's Book of Trump, that will be coming on at 7:30. I'm going to go on a little bit longer. So I do apologize, but you can catch, I guess, Gordon and replay a little bit, but I'm not going to go that far over. But I do want to show this video. It has a little reminder of just, we need these reminders sometimes. This is in the 90s, I think 93 or 94, when 60 Minutes did a bit of coverage on CIA operations controlling drugs in Vietnam. So I'm going to play that. I said Vietnam, I meant Nicaragua, you know. And, you know, we just have been all told that Maduro's was the head of the Gang of the Sun, or the turns out that was a fake gang. It was created by the CIA in the 90s as a fake gang to give an excuse to infuse all of these drugs, the cocaine from Venezuela, into North America. And that was actually done by design by the CIA. So let's play that, and then I'll just wrap it up. So here it is. Oh, I have to stop. I have to remove this. Yeah. Okay, so let's just play this. I hope people can hear. Actually, let's remove it and then replay it. Let me make absolutely sure that this can be heard, because last time people were complaining that they could not hear the video that I played, and I don't want that to happen again. So here, let's just remove this. Stop screen. Let's do this again. Share screen. Also allow access to audio. If people can't hear, please let me know.
Millions is smuggled into the United States. Sound familiar? Not the way this ton of cocaine got here. According to what the former head of the Drug Enforcement Administration told Mike Wallace, this drug shipment got here courtesy of what he calls drug trafficking by the CIA in partnership with the Venezuelan National Guard. While rumors of CIA involvement in drug trafficking have circulated for years, No one in the U.S. government has ever before publicly charged the CIA with this kind of wrongdoing. And it's not the kind of accusation anyone in government would make without thinking long and hard.
Let me understand what you're saying. A ton of cocaine was smuggled into the United States of America by the Venezuelan National Guard?
Well,
in cooperation with the CIA?
That's exactly what appears to have happened.
Until last month, Judge Robert Bonner was the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. And Judge Bonner explained to us that only the head of the DEA is authorized to approve the transportation of any illegal narcotics like cocaine into this country, even if the CIA is bringing it in.
Let me put it this way, Mike. If this has not been approved by DEA or an appropriate law enforcement authority in the United States, then it's illegal. It's called drug trafficking. It's called drug smuggling.
So what you're saying, in effect, is the CIA broke the law. Simple as that.
I don't think there's any other way you can rationalize around it, assuming, as I think we can, that there was some knowledge on the part of CIA, at least some participation in approving or condoning this to be done.
Judge Bonner says he came to that conclusion after a 2-year secret investigation conducted by the DEA's Office of Professional Responsibility in cooperation with the CIA's own Inspector General. And what reason did the CIA have for promoting this drug smuggling?
Well, the only rationale that's ever been offered is that this would lead to some valuable drug intelligence about the Colombian cartels.
Over half of the Colombian drug cartel's cocaine crosses the border with Venezuela on its way to the United States and Europe. Back in the 1980s, the CIA was mandated by then-President Reagan to develop intelligence on the Colombian drug cartels. And so the CIA, with Venezuela's Guardia Nacional, or National Guard, set up an undercover operation, a drug smuggling operation in Venezuela that could handle the transshipment of the Colombian cartel's cocaine on its way to market. The plan was to infiltrate the cartel, and it worked. Well, the CIA National Guard undercover operation quickly accumulated this cocaine, over 1.5 tons, that was smuggled from Colombia into Venezuela inside these trucks, and then was stored here at the CIA-financed Counter-Narcotics Intelligence Center in Caracas. The center's commander and the CIA's man in Venezuela was National Guard General Ramon Guillen Davila.
I tried to work together with them. I was always aware that they were not telling me everything they were doing.
Annabelle Grimm was a DEA agent with 18 years' experience when she was made agent in charge in Caracas. And she says that the CIA station chief, James Campbell, and this man, Mark McFarland, the CIA officer in charge at the center, told her that to keep the undercover smuggling operation credible, they had to keep the cartel happy. And the way to do that was simple: deliver their dope, untouched by U.S. law enforcement, to the cartel's distributors, their dope dealers in the United States.
The CIA and the Guardia Nacional wanted to let cocaine go on into the traffic without doing anything. They wanted to let it come up to the United States, no surveillance, no nothing.
In other words,
I think we get the point. I think in those days, I don't think a subject matter like this would be permissible in mainstream media today, but there was still apparently enough morality that type of topic was permitted to be discussed publicly back in the 90s. So God bless him, and God bless whoever uploaded that. But again, this was just part of a much broader thing. People might remember the MENA scandals, right? MENA, Arkansas scandals, with Governor Clinton overseeing something that involved massive infusions of Colombian cocaine coming in via Mexico through Arkansas, and then dropped from planes that went into this distribution hub that was overseen by intelligence operations tied to the U.S. deep state. This is something that George Bush Sr. was also overseeing with the crack rock operations in the 70s and the 80s, to make sure that the type of Fred Hamptons, again, Malcolm X's, the type of Martin Luther King spirit would not ever emerge again in anybody who would be instead too corrupt or too destroyed by the drug culture to ever tap into that type of source. This thing is, there's a long precedent, is what I'm trying to say. And it doesn't have anything to do with China as a state. If anything, when you look at China, they've done more than most anybody else over the course of the years, from the 1839 or 1840 efforts by the Qing emperor to finally say enough is enough and to call for a full government enforced burning of opium, which again earned British gunboats that came in and launched a full war and then did it again, to the efforts in 1950 to shut down crime and rehabilitate drug fiends, people who had been addicted, around giving them some sense of opportunity. And that happened around the same time or a little bit later, as the takedown of secret societies was also imposed on by mainland China. This was done again in 1979 by Zhou Enlai's student Deng Xiaoping, with again massive crackdowns on secret societies. Very important if you're going to be able to have a viable society. The way John F. Kennedy alluded to, he understood that when he said, "We're going to break this, I will break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds." That was the general orientation that a real fighter needs to have if they're going to be able to take on this type of behemoth. And there's a lot we could learn from how China's been able to carry out this type of thing, putting over 5 million party members into prison, giving them massive fines, in some cases a lot of death penalties, for just being total traitors. Like, you got to, examples do need to be made. You can't have Epstein client lists of pedophilia networks that everyone's allowed to know about and no justice is permitted. And the people who do get exonerated from actually having done crimes, like the former head of Honduras, or Michael Milken and others who actually do carry out terribly evil crimes, are the ones getting exonerated and set free. That is, it's demoralizing. It doesn't create a spirit where people feel like they can properly carry out a battle against evil. So there has to be, I think, a different appreciation about how this thing works. And just to end it quickly here, been through a lot of slides. I highly recommend people check out this book by Seth Harp, the former Assistant Attorney General of Texas, and he himself was an Army man. And he wrote the Fort Bragg Cartel, Drug Trafficking and Murder in the Special Forces, focusing specifically on Fort Bragg alone and the anomalously high amount of drug-related murders in Fort Bragg. I think there was like 27 murders in the past just several years alone. And massive cases of drug abuse, criminal activities, people getting their heads cut off, special forces operators killing other special forces operators. It's wild what 20 plus years in Afghanistan will do to people, and Iraq and just putting them into insane situations like the Boer War, where people are forced to do the unthinkable, like My Lai massacres and things, are given orders to do horrendous things that their conscience can't let them live with. And you get into these weird psychodynamic cycles where people depattern, they break down psychologically in order to just be functional. Drugs and a new type of worldview that's much more hardened and soulless has to sort of replace the former human you once were. And the type of culture that's created over generations now, going back to the unbroken continuity from really Korea onward, is sick. And how this particular hub of Satanism, again, keep in mind, Operation Phoenix was run by Michael Aquino, the leader, the high priest of the Temple of Set. Colonel John Alexander, another person who worked in Vietnam with Michael Aquino. They continued to work together over the years. Edward Lansdale, the guy who was in charge of, or played a role in killing JFK, as well as doing the Bay of Pigs and the murder attempts of many leaders, including the Guatemalan leader, Arbenz, with the Claire Chanel crowd. All of these crews are still operating. So that's just worth keeping in mind, that this book is available. That is one of many very useful books that have been written on the topic. And just to restate again for people who want to dig in more, The Great Heroin Coup by Henrik Kruger, extraordinary read. The FBI, CIA, the Mob, and Treachery by Rodney Stitch, incredibly important read. And Cynthia's book, The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set, a century of the origins of Anglo-American fascism over the course of the last 120 years that does go through this in a very important way. So I suggest people really check these things out. I'll make links to a variety of these important resources in the description box under this video. And of course, our Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops Volumes 1 and Volumes 2. Those are, Cynthia and I produced both of those. They're available as hardcovers, also as digital books. So if you want to really brush up on your information war armaments, these are perfectly good ways of doing it. We're going to be making more movies as well. So encourage people to kick in donations, and we put those to work to make movies, to make more of these special reports that we hope are weapons in the war against lies and lying liars who tell them. And we'll continue this exploration, possibly doing a dive on aliens and the alien psyop next week, because as you've all noticed, I'm sure, it's going loud and heavy and going to be getting louder with greater amplitude every day going forward. So good to know the history of where this psyop comes from, who's managing it, why are they managing it, what do they want to do. Yeah, I'll probably do that next week, I think. So either way, it'll be good. It'll be interesting. And I hope people enjoyed today's show. And I'll scroll. If there were any donations, I do apologize that I did not have really the means of keeping an eye on the chats. Yeah, I will scan through the chats, and if there's anything really noteworthy that comes to my attention, I'll take note and address it on the next Monday show. But yeah, thank you everybody for showing up, and enjoy Gordon's show following mine that has already begun. So take care, y'all.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.